Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for more dedicated legacy action. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are teaming up with another creator. We're playing with Ola from the Chrono Moon YouTube channel, which I will link in the description. So what we're going to do today is they are going to play Green-White Depth for 3 rounds, and I'm going to play a different one of the top decks against them in each round, and we're going to see how it matches up. So I'm going to do a little deck tech of the 3 decks I'm going to be playing, and I'm going to put them in randomly against the Green-White Depth deck. So the first list on the block is a mono-red Stompy list. We've seen decks like this throughout Legacy for a long time. We're using Ancient Tomb, City of Traitors, and then things like Chromox, Lotus Petal, and Sim Spirit Guide to power out things really early ahead of the curve and then steamroller a game that way. So we have things like Blood Moon and Megs the Moon, which can just create a complete non-game. We have the One Ring, which gives us all the cards we ever need, so we can just bury our opponent with Haymaker after Haymaker. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which is really the thing that put this deck in a solid position when this came out, because this just gives you a nice sort of middle of the road thing to do. We're getting a lot of resources from this one card, and it can sort of flex around and work with the other bits and pieces we're doing. So it can copy our Furies and Pyrogoyphs, or it can copy Broadside Bombardiers. It can give us food for Broadside Bombardiers in terms of treasure tokens. It helps us power stuff out if we're like maybe struggling for lands because we've lost some of our lands to Wastelands or City of Traitors because we don't have a Moon effect. It's just excellent. We have Chalice of the Void as another lock piece here. This particular list I'm playing today only has 2 Pyrogoyph. Sometimes you'll see up to 4 Pyrogoyph, but this particular build is running a couple of Lotus Petals to make sure it can reliably power out these big Haymakers slightly earlier. That's pretty much just the mono-red Stompy deck. You've seen it many times before. The sideboard is pretty familiar as well. We've got some Graveyard Hate, some stuff for turn 1 decks, and then various interaction of different stripes depending on what we need here. Alright, that's the first deck. The second deck we're going to be playing is Blue-Red Delver. Now this is a very familiar deck yet again. They're all going to be because we're playing the top decks of the format. So we've got our threat base of Delver of Secrets, Dragon's Rage Channeler, which we can use things like Mishra's Bauble to help flip our Delver, or Mishra's Bauble to get some surveil action with our Dragon's Rage Channeler, a bunch of cantrips to make sure we can find the pieces we need when we need them. We've got 3 Murktide Regents at the top end of the curve. These is going to be like our big Haymaker threat, and we've got Questing Druid as a sort of flex slot, which is going to be a little bit of card advantage from Seek the Beast, as well as being a creature we can play. We only have 1 Tropical Island, so it's not a thing that we're relying on playing, it's just something that sometimes comes up. We've got some red spells to interact with creatures that are on the board, and then we've got some blue spells like Force of Will, Force of Negation, and Daze to stop things getting to the board in the first place. And we have a 1-of Brazen Borrower, which is a nice catch-all. So a pretty stock sort of list here, which is kind of the whole idea of today. This particular build has 1 island in, which is becoming increasingly common. Other than that, just a bunch of fetches and volcanics. No Thundering Falls here. Some lists play Thundering Falls instead of the island. We got Wastelands as well, just classic Delvery goodness. Sideboard-wise, we just have some other tools, whether it's Counterbalance or Hydroblast or Consign to Memory and Force of Negation, even Pyroblast. We've got a lot more counters that hit different things in the sideboard. We've got a little bit more removal in the form of Abrade and a Price of Progress, which should be able to dome our opponent if they have a lot of non-basics, which in this particular round of games is quite likely to happen. A little bit of Graveyard Hate alongside a little bit more Graveyard Hate. I really like Grafdigger's Cage at the moment because it can also deal with Green Sun Zenith and things like that. Alright, that's Delver. You've seen it before. You're going to see it again. Let's see how we fare into Green-White Depths with it. The final deck, unsurprisingly, is going to be Blue-Black Reanimator. This is the best deck in the format right now. It is overperforming in terms of the amount of people playing it and the results it's putting up in Challenge Top 8s. We have this sweet little tempo shell of our Force of Will, Daze, plus a bunch of cantrips to get what we need. But then we're rolling in this Entomb and Troll of Khazad-dûm, so we can put a nice monster in the graveyard and reanimate it with Animate Dead or Reanimate. We've got some Thought Seizers for some nice interaction to stop whatever's in our opponent's hand. We've got a couple of Fatal Pushes as well, if there's any creatures that get in play that we need to deal with. This particular build is interesting because it has Tainted Indulgence. This might be one you haven't seen before. Blue and a black instant, draw 2 cards. Then discard a card unless there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard. So early on, we want to use this to discard a big monster. Later on, we want this to draw 2 cards. So it kind of does both of the things we want at different times, and it looks pretty solid to me. We've got a couple of Brazen Borrowers as some generic answers to problem permanents, and we have an additional monster that you may not always see in these lists, in Grizzlebrand. Once upon a time, this was just the best thing that you could reanimate. It's still pretty darn good now, and I've been impressed by the reanimated decks that are running this, so I wanted to try one out on the channel for you lovely people. There is also 1 Murktide Regent here as just another threat that is kind of on the fair end of the spectrum. So some people are playing things like Orcish Bowmasters in this slot, so not playing the Grizzlebrand, having a couple of Bowmasters in. But I think having this Murktide Regent is pretty interesting because the blue count of these decks, now they lost Psychic Frog, is not the best. So upping the blue count whilst also having another threat is pretty tasty. Sideboard-wise, we have a smattering of different tools, whether we're playing some creatures in Doughty Voidwalker, Bowmasters, and Barragoyf to circumvent some graveyard-based strategies of our opponent, where they're trying to erase our graveyard with Bajuka Bog or whatever. We've got some different counter magic options, depending on what our opponent is up to. We've got a little bit of removal in the explosives, a little bit of removal in the Dismember and the Fatal Push, and a little bit more graveyard hate in the Ghost Vacuum. So yeah, Blue-Black Reanimator, slightly different build to the one we played on the channel last time. I'm excited to put Tainted Indulgence through its paces. And that, everyone, are the 3 decks that we're playing today. So please remember to like and subscribe, and let's get right into it, where I get to be the bad guy playing all of the top decks, whilst our opponent will be the hero trying to persevere with Green-White Depths. Let's see how it goes. Alright, we're into game 1. And I am on the play, and I am playing Delver. So I think this looks like a pretty solid hand, so we're going to keep this one. So we have an option on our first turn of what land we're fetching. We could just go into double Volcanics. It does expose us to double Wasteland, but if our opponent is trying to Wasteland us whilst we're putting threats into play every single turn, that probably actually favours us in the end. So I will just go and get a Volcanic and deploy this Delver, because a Delver can attack for 3 on turn 2, whereas the Dragon's Rage Channel is very unlikely to do that. We're not desperate for any selection immediately either, so I'm just going to play this Delver and pass the turn. So we've got ourselves a Daze we can fire off if anything really scary happens, but if they play something like an Elvish Reclaimer, then we can just go Channeler, bolt it, and then we're cooking with gas then. Yavimaya. So this helps us cast our Questing Druid later on. This is a Crimson Zenith for Dryad Arbor. I'm happy to kill this. It makes our days better, but we'll see what we get off this Delver first. We will not reveal this island. That is unfortunate. So we do need to crack this if we want to cast our Lightning Bolt, because we need 2 different red sources. So we'll jam this little Dragon's Rage Channeler. I will bolt the Dryad Arbor. It makes our days more useful, and we have a second bolt if they have another creature that we need to kill. We get a Surveil here. I don't need another land, so that can go into the graveyard. It doesn't help us with Delirium, unfortunately. But we have some pressure coming in. If our opponent plays a creature, we can bolt it in the upkeep to see if we can flip the Delver more easily. I wonder if they're going to play around Daze, and they could just play like a 1-drop. Something like a Elvish Reclaimer. So basically the 2 things we're scared of here are Elvish Reclaimer and Knight of the Reliquary. Those are the 2 things that are most likely to ruin our day. I will reveal this Lightning Bolt, and we now have a 3/2 flyer. Am I playing out this island? I don't think I am. We could Brainstorm, put it back into our deck, and turn it into a real card. So I'm happy just to keep this around. Also gives us more resources for our opponent to worry about. Okay, a Wasteland. An Elvish Reclaimer. Sure, so they do have a bunch of green mana over there. So they could Wasteland their own Flagstones to make this dodge a Lightning Bolt. So I don't think we fire off the Lightning Bolt. We'll presumably get a better opportunity soon. This time I do want to play the island out. I will attack for 3 in the sky with a Delver, and I will play another Delver. So these Lightning Bolts could be going face, but if we get an opportunity to mess with this Reclaimer, I think we can take it. But the fact that they can just Wasteland here, and that's actually a pretty reasonable trade. I don't really want to trade 2 Lightning Bolts for a Reclaimer, because if these flip, we have our opponent at 1 life. If we can flip our second Delver. And if they spend 2 mana, they'll probably leave up the Wasteland, which means we can't just bolt our opponent's creature, because they'll still be able to waste. Let's see what this little Delver of Secrets does. Whatever they get off the Reclaimer is coming in tapped anyway, so I'm hoping that we can get over the finish line before whatever comes out of this matters. A Murktide Regent. That is an interesting one, isn't it? Right, I want to attack for just 3 here. So one of the plays available to us right now is to Lightning Bolt our opponent's face and make a 5/5 Murktide. And just say, we can get around whatever you're doing. I think that's fine. It's quite tempo-oriented. I don't think we're about trying to blow up this Reclaimer. We should be able to attack around the Marit Lage if they can make it next turn. And this gives us protection if they make it this turn as well. So I think we are going to Lightning Bolt our opponent's face and produce a relatively large body. It's a shame we didn't get to flip our Delver, but I think we're in a pretty solid position right now. I'm not expecting this Daze to come in handy, but you never know. We're putting a lot of pressure onto our opponent, so they're going to be activating their Reclaimer, getting rid of their Flagstones. So they can get something like a Maze of Ith here. They're getting a Savannah off the Flagstones, and then we get to see what they get off the Reclaimer. Thespian Stage. Okay, so I think we can beat the Marit Age if we flip our Delver. Because they're effectively on 4 here. Okay, so they have a Marit Age. Do they have something like a Swords to Plowshares? Like I said, this day is not really cutting the mustard right now. Okay, so they're not leaving up white mana, so this is good news for us. If they have a green spell, like a Crop Rotation, our days will actually be relevant here. We kind of need to flip the Delver, though. Truth be told. Come on, Delver. A Brazen Borrower. That's not a bad one, is it? So we can cast Petty Theft, bouncing this. They can't activate the Reclaimer, and if they have a Crop Rotation, we have that covered with the Daze. Alright, to the sideboard. So that was a pretty good example of what you want to do with Delver. You apply pressure, and then you kind of just get over the finish line with like the sort of skin of your teeth. Like we were prepared to use all the resources in our hand and be completely spent. And that's how I think Temper decks should be, where they have to use all their resources and leave their opponent with cards in hand. So our opponent finished the game with 4 cards in hand. Okay, to the sideboard. So I think we want these Price of Progress, just as a little bit more damage that we can get going here. I don't particularly like Daze in this matchup. I'm not really convinced about these sorts of things too much either. So there's definitely a lot of stuff we could trim. I think the Grafdigger's Cage to stop them casting Green Sun Zenith feels pretty interesting to me. I don't need Pyroblast here. I don't particularly like the Surge of Extractions. They can sometimes have things like Life from the Loam, which is annoying. But we kind of just have to suck it up if that's what happens. Consign to Memory. What is this doing? This can only hit triggered abilities or colorless spells. So it's probably not going to hit that many things. So we definitely want these options in. And then we have 5 more cards that we get to keep in our deck from this selection here. So we obviously don't want Hydroblasts or Pyroblasts. Abrade is interesting. It can certainly deal with some of our opponent's creatures. I don't mind having more removal, so I think I will chuck that in there as well. Being able to kill an early Reclaimer is pretty clutch here. What about the other 4 cards? So we can keep some forces in, because they're a way that we can just guarantee countering some of the big scary things. I don't believe we're actually going to resolve Dazes in a meaningful way. I think they're just going to have the mana to pay around it. Our opponent knows what they're doing. So I think we're probably looking at a few Force of Wills here. We could also just play a Counterbalance. Gives us another type that we can mill over for Delirium purposes, and sometimes it's just going to catch some stuff and mess our opponent up. Maybe that's better than the 4th Force of Will. Because they're going to have a lot of 1-drops, whether it's Swords to Plowshares, Elvish Reclaimer, Crop Rotation, stuff like that. And obviously, we are stacked in the 1-drop slot. Okay, I think I'm down with this. So we're less likely to get flooded with multiple Force of Wills. Having 1 clutch Force of Will to get over the line is nice. But we don't want to have multiple. It's not that sort of game. What does this hand do? I'll tell you what it doesn't do. I was going to say it doesn't cast spells. It does. It casts 2 of the spells in the hand. But this is not a hand we can keep. Okay, this is more like the sort of thing we're looking for. Do I think double Wasteland is where I want to be? Or do I want to have my second mana source in case things go awry? I think I want to have my second mana source, to be honest. The other option here is just to get rid of the Force of Will and have the double Wasteland and try and screw our opponent's mull to 5. But we don't have an answer for like a turn 1 Elvish Reclaimer, which could just run away with the game. I think I'm going to put back a Wasteland here. I think it's close. I think you could keep the Force or you could keep the Wasteland. I don't think we're getting rid of this because we have the Brainstorm fetch land that we can leverage here. But our opponent's mulligan is definitely going to be a useful tool for us. This is probably Swords to Plowshares mana. I don't think we're defending a channeler here. We at least get a little bit of value off of our ball before anything else happens here, because we get to cast this before our opponent gets priority. So some value has been earned here. I don't think we need this. That can go into the graveyard. I will see what our opponent's working with, so we have a little bit more information. A Crop Rotation. Okay, that is the sort of thing I would like to point a Force of Will at a later date. Alright, we didn't get plowed at the end step. That might be playing around Daze. It might just mean that they're in trouble. We'll see. We need to flip this. We've already got one of the harder types in Artifact. Alright, there is a Swords to Plowshares. Do we interact with this? I don't think we do. I think we just let this go. We're trying to leverage the fact that our opponent mulligan to 5. It kind of makes the card loss on a Force of Will not so big a deal. A Grafdigger's Cage. I don't hate that one. I think we're going to begin with a Brainstorm. because you want to cast Preordain after you've done all your fetch land stuff. So I'll obviously want to keep one fetch land. I like having the Wasteland. I think we're putting back one land, and then it's probably the Preordain. The Ponder is a stronger card than Preordain. And I like these options here. Let's crack this and shuffle. Going to get a Volcanic. And we're going to deploy this Grafdigger's Cage. That should shut off any sort of Green Sun Zenith. So that's a bunch of dead cards that our opponent could have in their hand, which is obviously even more detrimental when they start off with a mulligan. Delver is just a very good deck at punishing people who stumble. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. This crop rotation is very dangerous given this Force of Will. Yes, it costs us 2 cards, but it's going to cost them 2 cards to play this. One from hand and obviously the land they sacrifice. Now they can sacrifice a flagstone, so it doesn't feel quite as bad. But this could be a key part of what they're trying to do with their plan, and we can just snuff that out with a Force of Will. So I like where we're at right now. Okay, is this where I'm actually fighting? I guess we let the flagstones go through. But do I want to counterspell this crop rotation? What am I scared of them having? I haven't played a land yet. I think we have to counter this because they could just make a Marit if they just drop Thespin Stage after getting the other part of the whatever they needed. This is a big cost for us, taking our Ponder away. Okay, we have a Ponder. That is an excellent pickup for us. Let's see if we can find anything that resembles a plan here. I don't mind having another Wasteland, but I don't want to have to draw through all of this. I think we're going to go any order and shuffle. Our opponent has some pretty powerful cards in their deck, so I don't want to get caught out by them. Alright, let's play this Dragon's Rage Channeler. Let's see if our opponent has access to another crop rotation. They do not, so we're just giving them the full-on Delver business. Generally speaking, Green-White Depths is pretty good into Delver, but Delver is good. Delver doesn't have horrible matchups, necessarily. Like, it has game into everything because the tools it runs are so flexible and its curve is so low. Yep, so they were probably getting the Thespin Stage earlier off of that crop rotation, so they could have had a Marit that turn. A Delver of Secrets shot will have a different threat. So now all the sort of pieces have fallen by the wayside on both sides, and it's just who, like, if our opponent can draw out of this before we get to do Delver things. Scalding Tarn, we'll say no to that one. We don't have a Surveil land, so I'm not really sure I want to play this one out. I think I'll hold this for the purposes of Brainstorm potentially. Because like we can Brainstorm and this can be our land that we shuffle with, or it can just go back and become a good card depending on what we find. And the fact that this didn't flip the Delver, but we put it in our hand and we didn't play a land, might suggest to our opponent that we drew something like a Petty Theft. Because that would be one of the sort of things that we wouldn't cast on this board. And that might put them off of making a Marit token. Although we're definitely putting our opponent in a situation where they don't have much choice. Let's see what the Delver reveals for us. Okay, so now we will play the land out because we obviously got stung by another land getting taken out here. But we have a clock now. It's going to take, what, 5 turns to put this game away probably. But our opponent is at 10 at this point. So we need 4 more turns of attacking if everything remains as it is. But we're not going to fire these lightning bolts off until it becomes a good idea to do so. Alright, I will attack with our little friend. It does feel... Okay, a path to exile. I was going to say, it does feel like our opponent has a lot of ways of just messing with us here. And there's a bunch of draws that their deck has that can make us start falling behind. I'm going to go and get this Counterbalance and stick that in play. So if this was a Force of Will, how bad would it be right now? Very, very bad. The fact that it's a Counterbalance kind of justifies the fact that we trimmed one for this. Because this might be useful. Certainly more useful than a Force of Will right now. A Prismatic Ending. Come on, Counterbalance. We revealed a Brainstorm as well. Look at this, Counterbalance already paying for itself. Our opponent must have some amount of Green Sun Zenith in their hand. Let's see if we can Brainstorm into a threat here. Okay. Interesting combination of cards here. I think we put the Bolt on top. And then we can probably just put another Bolt. And then I will play out this Tropical Island. So we have the ability to play this Brazen Borrower and start attacking. Yes, we go a little shields down on a Dark Depths, but we need to get this game won before our opponent can leverage the cards in their hand. Now, we don't need many hits because we have all this burn. So I'll send one upstairs. I think we send one upstairs. at the end step. I think that's okay. This way it gives us the ability to cast both. If our opponent cracks a fetch land for any reason, we can just win in response to the fetch. I feel pretty comfortable. Our opponent did mulligan, giving us a bit of a non-game. But we had some important tools. Now we can just attack and keep going here. Just crack for 3. Play another threat. We have lethal damage. We can fire it off if our opponent does anything, or we can just fire it off at end step. A Savannah. So they have the ability to play some green spells right now. But it seems like it just took them too long to draw out the situation they ended up in. So I don't actually need to burn our opponent to win the game here. We can just swing away. And then if our opponent has any action, then we can start firing some lightning bolts to close this one off. Alright. Let's see if the counterbalance does anything here. No. Alright, let's bolt our opponent upstairs here. Alright. So we're a little bit reserved. We could have tried to win a turn earlier, but we didn't need to. We were already in control of the game. Okay, so now let's go and play the next deck. We are into the second round now. We are playing the mono-red Stompy deck. And our opponent is on the play. Okay, we have a turn 1 Fable. That seems perfectly serviceable here. I will keep a Mox Diamond. I'm not going to mulligan specifically for a hand that beats what our opponent's playing. That's not quite cricket, is it? Sylvan Library. Yeah, good cards are good. I think Fable on turn 1 is better than anything else we can do here. So we'll jam this one. We will play the Chrome Mox out. I think it's the Sundering Eruption, although I am really worried about Prismatic Ending, but we do have the Petal if we need red mana. So I think it is just the Sundering Eruption here. Alright, there is a Fable. Our opponent having a Mox Diamond means that they're going to be less susceptible to getting blown out by a Blood Moon anyway. Obviously, it's still going to be good against them, but maybe it can enable what they're doing because they can play a Dark Depths into the Blood Moon and then blow up our Blood Moon somehow. So we have a Shaman here. We didn't play out the Lotus Petal because we know our opponent has some amount of Prismatic Ending in their deck. And I don't just want to play this out for no value. This is also a card we can loot away if we feel like it. We have quite an aggressive hand. Alright, let's see what our opponent wants to do here. They could Wasteland our tomb. I don't think that's necessarily the best choice. We don't know what's in our opponent's hand. It might be. But I think they should be committing things to the board now. They kept 2 cards off the library, so they're obviously got tools they want to leverage. So I think making sure they have enough mana to leverage these tools is probably quite important. But it's a case of what they try and stick now. If they can put something with presence on the board, I think that's pretty good. The issue is they only have 1 coloured source right now. Okay, we're looking at some kind of crop rotation line. Obviously, they have to respect Blood Moon as well. Well, they are just going for the Wasteland route. Let's see what we draw and see what we want to ship away. So we will discard some cards here. I think we can get rid of this. I want to get rid of City. We could just play a Broadside Bombardiers here and maybe get rid of the Fable. But the City gives us the Broadside Bombardiers to attack straight away, and that feels really strong. So maybe it's just the Petal here that goes. Okay, a Pyrogoyf. I don't hate that for us. Let's jam a Broadside Bombardiers and start coming in with the beats. I don't think we fling the treasure this turn. Yeah, plow is good. So the other option there is to play the Chalice first. But I think we want to keep pressure up on our opponent. Because at present, we are pretty cold to the old Marit token. However, if we can get our opponent low enough, then Pyrogoyf can do enough. It's already a 3-4, so our opponent is at an effective 7. So we only need to clock for a little bit more. If we'd have connected once with the Bombardiers, we could have put our opponent in a position where the Pyrogoyf beats them even through the Marit so they might end up in a situation where they have to plough their own Marit which is not a position you really want to be in. And we don't have another land drop here. That does not bode well for our opponent. It does mean their hand is just full of gas, though. So this flips over. I don't think we need to... I guess we could play the Chalice for 1 first and see what that gets. Although if we play the Chalice for 1 pre-combat, our opponent is less likely... Sorry, it's more likely to plough our Shaman token and not give us the treasure. So I think we want to get the treasure first, and then we'll play the Chalice. And then next time we can play Pyrogoyf and copy it with Reflection of Kiki Jiki, and that is going to be lights out. So let's see how this chalice does for us. Right, we've got crop rotation. We don't have any answers to stuff like that. We're proactive by playing lock pieces. Right, so they've got themselves a flagstones. That is unfortunate for them that they had to go through these loops because they didn't find enough land. Right, so we're seeing the plough as I suspected. We play out the Pyroglyph right now. That's probably the best way that we can inflict additional damage to our opponent. Just keep the aggression coming. Stone our opponent. This puts them to 5, which is exactly the damage we have on board. So I'm pretty happy with where we sit right now. Sylvan Library is a pretty messed up Magic the Gathering card, though. Can certainly find them something. Just a free Brainstorm every turn. Not bad. What more could you want from a green card, right? So they might be able to answer this Chalice with something like a Prismatic Ending. That's going to cost them 2 mana so it doesn't get hit by the Chalice. Which means they're not going to have a lot of mana left to answer our stuff. Best case scenario for them is probably something like... I guess they could play a pretty sizable Knight. It's pretty good. Or they could Prismatic Ending this, plough this, take 2, and then next turn do something. It's going to be a tall ask. But how big will Knight be? 2, 3, 4, 5. If they can play a Knight, it'll be a 5/5, so it will be the biggest thing on the board. So our Pyroglyph won't be able to attack into it very effectively. Now we could attack around it and push damage. But we're going to need that final point from somewhere. Or the final 3 points. Prismatic Ending. Okay, so they probably have the Prismatic Ending and then path or plough our Pyroglyph. Okay, so we have the chump blocking Elvish Reclaimer. I don't mind that. The One Ring. Now that is a messed up Magic the Gathering card. So if we attack with both of these, like they have to block one of our creatures. If they block this one, then fetch lands are just off. I think that's okay for us. Okay, they're going to 1 here. So turning off fetch lands, I think we're just going to play the most messed up Magic the Gathering card we have access to. Boy howdy is this card messed up. Just keep dropping the haymakers. Pyroglyph. So we have lethal in hand. Through basically anything our opponent does, they would have to plough their own guy. I don't know if there's a way that they can disrupt what we've got going on here. This only gets things tapped, so they can't get a Wasteland and take us off of 4 mana. But they might be able to conjure up a Wasteland. We don't have a Chalice hanging around anymore, so things like crop rotation are definitely live here. So there's a Wasteland. So they can take us off of 4 mana, so they don't have to worry about the Pyroglyph anymore. If they have something like a Knight of the Reliquary, they will have the ability to try and stabilize here. Now, they're on a very precarious life total. And we do have the One Ring, so it's only a matter of time before we find the resources to deploy this or a Broadside Bombardiers to just dome our opponent. They could Wasteland our City Traitors, block here, sack the Flagstones of Troykair to shuffle the library cards and maybe find part of their combo, and then try and assemble a Merit next turn, and that might be good enough. Ramunap Excavator. Okay, so this Wasteland is going to be all up in our business over and over again. I see. Well, we are a deck with fast mana. There's a lot of draws here. Like any of our soul lands can do it. The One Ring is, as I said, a pretty messed up Magic the Gathering card. Let's draw some more cards. Broadside Bombardiers, that does it. So this attacks and we fling something at our opponent and they die. Alright, we got a game 1. I think our opponent gets more from the sideboard than we do though. So, options. We have options. It's basically a bunch of these red cards. So we don't need any of this stuff over here. These cards are things that we can potentially bring in. So being able to bounce a Merit token feels pretty important because we're cold to it otherwise. I don't think Pyrokinesis is better than Fury. So I think we keep the Fury over that. And again, I don't think the Fire Conference is where I want to be. I think it's just the Dead Gods. What are we playing the Dead Gods over? That is the more difficult question here. So obviously Blood Moons and stuff feel pretty good against our opponent's land-centric deck. So I think we want to keep all our Blood Moons in. Being able to shut off crop rotation and plough feels really key here as well. Probably somewhere along these lines. Like I like having these because they can kill the little elf. But this can kill the elf as well. The Pyroglyph goes to face, which is kind of makes you want the Pyroglyphs over the Furies if in terms of what we're cutting. You have a 2-2 split and then have these. So this can kill an elf early doors. It can also flex and kill the Merit Lage. So I think that's all we're bringing in. Now, there is also the issue where we play a Blood Moon. Our opponent plays a Dark Depths. They remove our Blood Moon and then we lose the game. That is a thing that happens. It happens a lot more with green-black Turbo Depths because they are packing a bunch of things to deal with that, you know, like your Abrupt Decays and whatnot, where our opponent just has white spells. That still might be good enough to mess with what we're up to, though. Okay, I think we're going to submit like this and see how it goes. I think on the play, we'll definitely want the Blood Moons in, because if we just go turn 1 Blood Moon, that might just be the game. Whereas on the draw, our opponent gets a turn to like fetch, and that could be quite a big deal. Or they get a turn to just use their green source, play an Elvish Reclaimer, and then they can invalidate our Blood Moon. So maybe there's an argument for even trimming on the Blood Moons. This is a turn 1 Blood Moon, or a turn 1 Fable the Mirror Breaker. I will keep this hand, and we will see which one I want to go for. An Elvish Reclaimer. So this kind of invalidates us just immediately Blood Mooning here. So I think we're just going to play the Fable. Chalice of the Void. I don't think that's the one here. Right, so let's play out this Chrome Mox, and I will imprint. I think it's going to be this Blood Moon, and play out this Fable. I don't know if this is the amount of times that I've played Depths decks into mono red and just absolutely donked all over them that's making me play in a slightly different fashion. But I don't think just playing out a Blood Moon here matters when they have the Reclaimer, because they can go and get their basic, or they can go and get something else. So they can take out our Ancient Tomb here, but we have access to treasures from the Fable potentially. So they might just want to hold back and activate the Reclaimer. That's a perfectly fine play here. That gives us the ability to potentially Pyrogoyf it. However, if they have a Sujiri step, they can protect themselves in the Pyrogoyf, and we've kind of wasted our doming ability. The reason the Pyrogoyf will be able to kill this is because we're going to discard some cards with Fable. I think this game is quite nicely poised. Alright, hitting our Ancient Tomb. So the Pyrogoyf is off, unless we find some fast mana here. Magus of the Moon. I'm going to be discarding some cards here. I think we're going to get rid of a Magus, and it's either the Sundering Eruption or the Chalice here. I think we're going to get rid of... Maybe... No, I don't think it is the Pyrogoyf. I don't think the Pyrogoyf goes here. Maybe it's the other Magus. Like, I don't really want the Magus until we kill the Reclaimer. If we bin off the Sundering Eruption and don't hit a land, we're going to feel like a clown. Alright, I'm going to get rid of this Chalice. Okay, we did hit another land. I'm going to attack with our Shaman token here, get a bit more mana. I don't believe our opponent's going to block here. They can just take the damage. Oh, interesting. Are they going to crop rotate for a fetch land here? If that's what they're doing, that's not the scariest thing for us, to be honest. I assume they're going to get a basic here. They didn't get a basic. That's excellent news for us. Okay, so now I will play Volcanic Fissure. I'll pay 3 life. And now we are going to deploy this Blood Moon as an enchantment rather than the Magus of the Moon, where they could answer it with a plow right now. So this means that our opponent at least has to spend their second turn Blood Mooning, like getting through the Blood Moon by getting their basic. If they'd have fetched a basic there, I'm not sure what our play actually ends up being. If they get a basic Forest, we probably play the Magus. If they get a basic Plains, then I guess we probably still play the Blood Moon. He's going to go on the beatdown here. We will eventually be able to deal with this as a creature. We didn't have a second land. Our opponent's having a real rough time with lands over there. Right, so flip this over. Do we play the Mountain or do we play the Eruption? I think we just play the Mountain here. And I'll deploy a second Blood Moon. Alright. So we are in a pretty strong position here. We can just start doing Pyrogoyf things. I think our opponent's toast here. Next turn our opponent dies, I think. If we draw a land, they're definitely dead, because we have 3 Pyrogoyfs in play. Alright, and Mox Diamonds. They must have a land in hand. Maybe it's a... I was going to say maybe it's a Dark Depths, but you would play the Dark Depths into this. Ploughing that is perfectly understandable. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So our opponent is very nearly dead. A Fury, we don't care about that one. We're just going to jam some Pyrogoyfs until our opponent dies. So they see themselves and each other. So this is 8 damage. And then we crack for 6 damage. So our opponent has to have a pretty phenomenal turn to get out of this. Alright, and that is the match. We've got one more round to go. But if it goes really quickly, it just means we have more time to talk about it afterwards. But let's see how the final round goes. Alright, I get to be full-on bad guy with some blue-black Reanimator. So this hand is okay. We've got Island Ponder. It's not a bad way to start a game of Magic the Gathering. We have a Tainted Indulgence, which can get rid of this Arcane of Cruelty when the time comes. I think this hand is fine. Our opponent is on the play. They've mulled to 6. Oh, they're on to 5. Having a rough time over there today. Flagstones. I don't think I'll be wastelanding that one in particular. Let's jam this island. We do have another blue card in the Tainted Indulgence, so I'm okay to ponder here. We don't actually need any of these cards, really, so I'm going to go in here and shuffle. We're looking for reanimation effects. So next turn we can cycle Troll for an Underground Sea and ponder. I would quite like a basic land to work with here, though. Okay, we're going to be doing this a little bit slower then. I think we can cast the ponder and then use the Troll of Khazad-dûm here. Reanimate is exactly what I'm looking for. We'll drop the Wasteland and use this to cycle our Troll, which also shuffles those cards off the top. That can get us our basic Swamp, and then next turn we have the Tainted Indulgence, and then the turn after we can reanimate the Archon of Cruelty. So it's a multi-step process here, but we have it backed up by a Force of Will. And if we need to, we can always take a turn off and fail push something. That's kind of the cool thing about the Blue-Black Reanimator deck, is it can kind of take things at whatever pace it needs to. So our opponent's got a Mox Diamond there, pitching and Echoing Deeps. A Knight of the Reliquary. Are we able to get Revolt next turn? We are, if they don't wasteland us. That is an interesting trade-off. I'm going to cycle this Troll now and get a basic Swamp. Our opponent didn't respond to that. Are they going to wasteland our Wasteland? As soon as we get to untap, we're okay. Okay, so we do get to kill this. Again, we have to take things a little bit slower than I originally wanted, but I think that's fine. So I would like to wasteland our opponent's Savannah, I think, here. And then we will Fatal Push their Knight. Wastelanding them also makes our Daze a lot more live. But we sort of paired our opponent's hand back to 1 card. So I don't have a lot of resources left, and we have a whole bunch. Thespian Stage. Now this is the sort of thing we're going to struggle to answer if they can assemble this. Okay, so they're just getting themselves a basic, so we can't just straight up wasteland this. Sure, makes sense. This is an instance, so we don't have to do it now, but if we do it now, we might be able to make a land drop. Do we want to make a land drop in the face of a wasteland? I don't think so. I think we just hold this and... Okay, I guess we could have drawn a wasteland is the other thing, but I think having the Tainted Indulgence so we can select for what we're looking for. I guess we're always discarding this Archon of Cruelty, though. We just have so much stuff up here. I think if they played a Knight here, I would Force of Will it, pitching a Daze, just because we have another one ready to go. But Tainted Indulgence, when we have a card to discard here, feels so good. Like when we don't want this in hand, this is a blank card in our hand. This is just a 2-mana draw 2 at instant speed. That seems pretty bananas to me. Big fan. It's also got some pretty cool art. Alright, let's get rid of this Archon of Cruelty. So we've sculpted a hand where we're just incredibly protected to do the most broken thing we can do. Do I want to play this Animate Dead? Does it matter? Does it matter what one we play here? If we reanimate this and we draw into a blue source, we have to be into a black source. We can take an Indulgence as well. Okay, I think I'm going to reanimate this Archon. It's not the most mana efficient play, but it is slightly bigger. Now, Marit Lage can beat this. We can attack. They can make it in combat. So we have 8 cards in hand. I guess we just go to discard and we can just get rid of this. Reanimate is fine. What's happening here? Okay, so they're copying the flagstones. So the flagstones cycle. So this one goes away to Legend Rule and they get to produce another land out of it. So this helps them fix whatever they're doing. A Lush Portico. That's pretty nice. Get a bit of Surveil going. I just don't know how they're supposed to beat our hand of just all the protection you've ever seen. I guess even if they draw the Marit Lage, we just have this covered with the Brazen Borrower. Oh, this Blue-Black Reanimated deck is too good, isn't it? We're just playing... We're like a Harlem Globetrotter right now. We just look at all of our excellent resources. Now, it should be noted, our opponent did mulligan a lot in game 1. In this game, even. So it was a 5-card hand they started with, which isn't really what you want. I'll play this land out. Maybe we're supposed to attack first, actually, and get the Wasteland, but I feel so confident what we have here. A Crop Rotation. I think we can just say no to this one. Pitching a Daze. So our opponent has no cards in hand here. A Troll of Khazad-dûm. Don't really care about that one. I don't think there's any need to do anything here. We can just pass over. And this will kill our opponent on the next attack step. Alright. let's hope our opponent doesn't mulligan to 5 and we get more of a game out of this one. So our opponent probably has quite a lot of graveyard hate. So maybe this is one of the games where we sort of come off of the graveyard plan a little bit. Although Tainted Indulgence does change the metrics on that, because this card just means, oh, we have a dead card, we get to replace it for relatively free value. I don't particularly want Thoughtseizers here, and I'm not a big fan of Dazes into our opponent's deck that has a lot of raw mana. I do want to Dismember, so I would like to kill our opponent's very clutch creatures here. I don't think this is a Force of Will sort of deck. So the one reason we might want Force of Will is if our opponent has access to like a crop rotation and we don't Force of Will it, then they can get a creature that maybe we can't deal with. So that is kind of the one drawback of taking out a Force of Will. But I think we can at least strip out a couple. But what are we boarding in here? If we want to board in all of these things, that works. If we would also like an Engineered Explosives, we can do that. So I think this is probably what I'm looking at to start off with. Do I want to change anything here? Obviously our Wastelands look pretty good here. We only have 3 of them, but I think that's pretty good. Honestly, I don't really want to get rid of the graveyard plan. I just think it's too strong. We could trim on one of the monsters we're getting. So we could trim on a Grizzlebrand because they already have Karakas, but if they have Karakas and they're bouncing a Grizzlebrand, we've already drawn 7 cards, and that's probably going to be lights out for our opponent. So maybe we just board in this sort of fair plan and board off of these sorts of things. So the reason I don't like the Thoughtseize that much is a lot of the things that we want to stop can be lands from our opponents, and it gets to a certain point and this isn't necessarily hitting very much. I think I would rather have access to removal, so if we draw this a turn after they play their knight, we can actually answer it. I think this is what we're going to go with. I'm debating the Engineered Explosives because it deals with Mox Diamonds, which can jam our opponent up in a big way if we're trying to play a mana denial game with our Wastelands. Or we can kill the Elvish Reclaimer. Those are the 2 things I'm considering. So maybe we'll go slightly off and take an Animate Dead, or do we take out an Entomb? I think Entomb is the least likely of these cards to be useful. I'm going to replace an Entomb with an Engineered Explosives, because we can reanimate our opponent's stuff with an Animate Dead, and we're aiming to kill their creatures a bunch. Okay, our hand is not the quickest thing, but obviously single draws can completely change that, because Entomb is a pretty messed up Magic the Gathering card. Not sure how much longer we'll get to play with Entomb and Legacy, to be honest. Alright, we've got a Mox Diamond and a Plane, so our opponent's got something like a potential Sylvan Library on turn 1 here. That's really strong. A Green Sun Zenith for Elvish Reclaimer. So we can kill this if we want to. I think we kill it off of an Underground Sea. We can't allow this to untap, because we never get to do graveyard stuff while that is able to get whatever. Okay, so they can Wasteland us here, that's fine. We did this on purpose because we have 3 additional mana sources in hand. So we want to play out the Flooded Strand and get a basic island with it. And then we're going to cycle this troll. I don't think we need to do anything else here. I think we're just going to Brainstorm and then cycle the troll as a shuffle effect later on. I guess we have so many shuffle effects. Alright, let's Brainstorm. We definitely don't want to draw this Archon of Cruelty. The other cards here I'm down for. We don't actually have a reanimation spell. We could just go off the whole reanimator plan and go into the fair plan. And if we pick up a reanimation spell, we've got this troll. We could just put the Brainstorm on top and draw the Brainstorm next turn anyway. Alright. We have an answer to Marit Lage. We have a counter spell. It's just going to turn into a basic land that is. Oakley dokley. So we'll make decisions about whether or not we want the Brainstorm in a second. Alright, our opponent's hitting their land drops this turn. This game, sorry, which is what I want to see. I want to have a proper go of this one. That's a very nice forest, isn't it? Okay. What are we looking at? So like a knight here. A Knight of the Reliquary. Is this Force of Willable? It is. Do we have to Force of Will it? We could Force of Will it and then cycle this and just slam a Baragoyf. I think that's fine. So I don't have a Wasteland in play anymore. So I used that earlier. So we can go and get an Underground Sea, I think, here. And then we'll cycle the Troll at end step and get a basic Swamp. And that gets us basics to play on. So let's make our opponent expend resources. Okay. We do just have the option of doing the busted thing. Do I think our opponent has Graveyard Hate in their hand? They didn't do anything on their second turn with 3 mana. So what are these 2 cards in hand? So let's think this through. They could have Swords to Plowshares. That would be a sort of card that they haven't had an opportunity to cast yet. We'll play our Swamp because we're always playing that. So we could get this plowed and then just do our thing. They could also just have Graveyard Hate. It's a really interesting call, this. I think we're going to try the Barragoyf out first. See if we can get some of our opponent's resources and then just play something like an Archon or an Atraxa. Okay, so they have the Merit Lage combo. We can answer that with this Borrower. We don't... If we draw another mana source, we don't even lose to a Sugiri Step either. Because we can make our big guy. Are they going to do it now to dodge Wasteland? Because that plays into our Archon of Cruelty line. Alright, they've got 1 mana up after this. Okay, so they have a 20/20. So we could bounce this, or we could Archon of Cruelty. I think the problem with doing Archon of Cruelty lines here... Okay, we get to do both. Oh, our deck is so busted, isn't it? Okay, so we get to Entomb Reanimate here. Get Archon of Cruelty and answer this. If they have Graveyard Hate, like Fair and Macabre or something... Okay, they don't. So they just absolutely screwed here. Have they got a Dryad Arbor... a crop rotation for Dryad Arbor here. Talongate of Madara. They have 1 colourless mana up. Do we bounce this right now when our opponent doesn't have the mana? I think we do. Because if we let our opponent untap, they'll have green mana and they can maybe protect their guy. So our opponent is in a world of trouble here. So we get to deal 4 damage here. Remove 4 cards. I will take back this Murktide Regent. I don't mind having another flying blocker for next turn. Just pop out a graveyard. We should be able to make a reasonable sized Murktide without impacting our Barragoyf too much. And we are representing lethal damage on the crackback here. A Swords to Plowshares buys them a bit more time. We've got some pretty solid draws we can have here. We can have a Force of Will. We can then hardcast. Alright, we've got something happening. A crop rotation. We don't have an answer for this. Okay. What is their solution to what we're doing? Echoing Deeps. Getting Talon Gates. They're going to phase out our Archon of Cruelty. Sure. Now we still have this Barragoyf. We also have a Reanimate. Do we want to do anything with a Reanimate? Not right now. Okay, I think we'll attack with our Barragoyf here. Yes, let's mill a bunch of cards. I will take this Doughty Voidwalker, I guess. We can just reanimate an Atraxa as well. Just gas right back up into some bits and pieces. Okay, there's 1 artifact, so that's an easy one. I'll take this removal spell. Oh, why's it gone small? Alright, our opponent has conceded, and I don't blame them because we've just got a lot of nonsense there. Well, I feel pretty bad because that was just a complete clean sweep. Our opponent mulliganed to 5. Yeah, our opponent mulliganed to 5 in, I think, at least one of the games in every round. That is not really the way we wanted to do it. But that is Magic the Gathering sometimes.
All right. First off, Cyrus, thank you for battling 3 duels with me.
Absolutely my pleasure. Even though I was the bad guy today.
You were the bad guy, and I was trying to at least as I see, the only thing I tried to do was to cheat out 20/20 flyings, and that's as fair as you can get, right?
Yeah, no, I'm fully on board with all the 20/20 action you can provide.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's awesome. So I thought that we'd just go through some of the key takeaways from the matches that we played.
Yeah, and, sure. It's a bit unfortunate with some of your mulligans, but that is Magic the Gathering sometimes.
It is. And I'm happy if my mulligans are here today and not when I am out playing in paper or in the Magic Leagues. No, but I did mulligan a lot, but I didn't find green mana. That was kind of my problem. The first game that we played, that was against Delver, and what I always think and say is that Delver is generally a matchup that you want to face when you're on green-white depths or green-white X depths decks.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I was saying that myself while I was playing through the games. Like, generally speaking, I would rather be on the green-white depth side, but then nothing has very few decks have an amazing Delver matchup is the thing. Like, you can have a positive matchup, but it's still just playing cheap cards that are very good. So there's always ways it can get you.
It's the legacy equivalent of modern Jund when that was a deck back in the days, the 55% deck.
Back in the day, I loved a bit of Jund.
Yeah. Well, I was on Pod when that was a deck, but yeah. A long time ago. But I think that because when we went through the games, I talked a little bit on how I usually lose against Delver, and one of the ways that I usually lose against Delver is when Delver has a aggressive creature start and the right kind of interruption, if it's a Wasteland or if it's a Bolt for a Reclaimer or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if the game goes long, then you just grind over the top of whatever Delver's doing. So they kind of have to get business done early doors, really.
Yeah, and I think that in the first game you had a couple of aggressive one-drops, and I wasn't able to catch up, and I don't remember them in detail, but I know that there was some kind of mana problem involved as well. And when I eventually went for the Merit Lage, I did a slight misplay as well. I didn't think that I had Yavimaya out because I didn't tap the Dark Depths for mana. Because if I thought about that, I would at least have had a Reclaimer activation up to kind of protect it, not knowing what you had in your hand, of course. But that's one of the misplays, at least, that I thought about there.
Yeah, like I felt pretty like my hand was genuinely pretty solid. Like I had like the perfect Delver hand to begin with. I was like, okay, I've got removal for little guys, I've got counter spells, and I've got 2 threats in my opener, I think, to begin with. So I just felt like I was in a pretty solid position. And I think it was the second game where I pretty much used all the resources I had left to get through. And that is kind of the Delver experience, where your opponent dies, where they have like 4 cards in hand, and you've got nothing, but you've managed to just get over the line. I think that sort of showcased the sort of the lines that the different decks work on, because your deck is able to grind a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, you kind of trade or you spend resources early to close the game quickly against me. I spend resources early to hinder you from closing the game. But then if I'm able to do that, if I get down in endurance, for example, or something that can kind of get rid of your blockers, I think, or make it that you can't attack, and then I get to land like a knight or 2. I think it's looking good from my point of view.
Yeah, I think.
I also remember. Sorry.
Sorry, now you go on.
There was also a play there when you bolted me, and I was talking a little bit about maybe I should have gone for Bog there, because I think it was quite clear that you had a Murktide in your hand there and just wanted to add up to the graveyard. So I think that was I went for something else instead. But I think that was also because what I was talking a little bit about is one of the threats that's really hard for the green-white depth deck to handle is the Murktide, because it's large, it closes the game quickly, and it's maybe you can have a Maze Rift or something like that, but you have Wastelands and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that I really need to prevent.
I think it's also how the Delver game starts off. So if the Delver game starts off with little creatures, then you have to use your Swords to Plowshares earlier on those little creatures. And then all of a sudden there's a big Murktide, and it's kind of a bit of a problem to deal with, which can definitely sort of slow down control. Whereas if I have a Delver hand that's a little bit slower and we're doing Seek the Beast type stuff, I would not back myself to win that matchup if I'm sort of, spending turns just accruing a little bit of card advantage and just giving you the breathing room.
Yeah, definitely. And one more thing about that, because that was a situation that came up in this game as well, is that you had both an unflipped Delver and 1/1 Dragon's Rage out, and I had a Swords of Plowshares. And I'm not really sure what the correct threat to go after there is. The Dragon Rage gives you selection, but I think it was quite far from flipping or turning big. And if the Delver flips, it's a much faster clock for you as well.
Yeah, that's always an interesting one. I think I normally look at the metric of how many cards are in the Delver's player's hand, because if they have more cards, then the Dragon's Rage Channeler is just going to provide more value. But if they're already like a bit lower on resources, then maybe it's going to be hard for them to transform this Dragon's Rage Channeler into a 3/3. So maybe the Delver becomes the better shout there. It also depends how well your deck can interact with the graveyard. So if you're playing like a Paducah Bog deck, maybe hitting the Delver is the better choice there. But normally I would go for cards in hand and see if I can nail like the Channeler before they get to leverage the +1 Surveil to every spell.
Yeah, oh, that sounds fair. Looking at the second matchup, the mono red matchup, also a comment from me there early was that I'm really happy that I got to face that deck because we don't have it that much in our local metagame on our Thursday nights. So it was nice to get some reps because that's one of the decks that I would feel if I went to a large tournament now or if I played like a premium event, I would most definitely face that deck at least once or twice during the tournament because it feels like it's one of the most played decks right now and it feels really good as well.
Yeah, so the decks I chose to play today were the 3 most played decks according to MTG Goldfish, but also the 3 decks with the most top 8s of online challenges since the start of January.
Yeah.
So I thought they would be like the best gauntlet to sort of show off what the meta looks like right now. And I think mono red is an interesting matchup for you because sometimes the blood moons help you rather than hinder you if you have the right stuff. So I had a choice of playing a blood moon on turn 2 in one game, or I could play the Fable. And because you already had the Reclaimer down, it just seemed better to play the Fable and sort of get something going on the board before trying to sort of curtail your mana. And maybe that doesn't work. It maybe buys me 1 turn where you get to activate your Reclaimer and find a basic. But then that 1 turn, I'm not doing anything with it. Whereas if I already have a Fable down and then make you do it, then I'm actually gaining some tempo on that one.
Exactly, and with the Fable down, it also allows you to kind of aggressively go for the 4-drops, and I think that's the 4-drops in the mono red Stompy deck right now when they're playing both the rings and the Pyrogoyfs is what's pushed that deck a little bit up on top, and it's so hard for me to limit your mana if you have the Goblin token, the Goblin generating 1 treasure per turn as well. You'll get to 4 mana eventually. Otherwise, I mean, when we had the old mono red Stompy deck with the goblins that made goblin tokens, you could go after the soul lands a little bit more aggressively and kind of hinder it. But with the goblin token and stuff like that working for you, it's harder for me if you play that as an early pressure. And then as a comment to what you said there as well, with the Reclaimer down, the moons are annoying. That's what they are. They're more annoying if you have a Blood Moon down than if you have a Magus down, because I tend to play more removals for the Magus, but or the Magi, Magi, yeah. But I didn't feel that bad there. Unfortunately, I didn't draw any lands that specific game. So I think that if I got a land down there, and I was able to start emptying my hand, because you got a Chalice down as well, and I had a lot of. Maybe that was the first game, but I know you got a Chalice down in one of the games, and I had a lot of 1-drops that I hadn't been able to cast because I had so much colorless mana in the deck, and that's one of the things that people don't really think about, that the green-white depths is actually a 3-color deck because you play so much mana that doesn't produce colored mana in it that becomes a problem like it was here.
Yeah, so in my experience playing like the green-white depths, I'm not very good at playing them. I find them quite difficult to play because they're quite unique in how they operate compared to... Like, I've played quite a lot of lands in the past, but that plays very differently to green-white depths. Obviously, turbo depths is very different, even though they both have some overlap. But in my experience, when people are trying to splash a 3rd color into like the green-white depths decks, it kind of feels more like trying to splash a 4th color because, like you said, you have all this colorless mana. And I really don't like it. I understand why people do it, because obviously it does some incredible work if you've got something like an Orcish Bowmasters. But I think the extra fragility it brings is just something that I'm not that comfortable with. I tend to like lifting up the floor of my decks rather than pushing the ceilings up as a general rule.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. And now I was on a slightly different build today than I usually am. But one of the benefits with going green-white as well is that you can play one fewer fetch land, and you can play Saga if you want to as well as a kind of an additional or an additional grindy card if you want to do that. You can't play that in 3-colored, or at least I haven't gotten to work in 3-color because it's just
a bit too much, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, it is. But otherwise, I felt very run over in that game.
Yeah, I just kind of did the silly mono red thing where I just sort of played nothing but haymakers every single turn, and it's just like, well, yeah, no breathing room allowed for you, and the One Ring is a pretty messed up Magic the Gathering card. I think if my 4-drop was not the One Ring in the game where I had the One Ring, then that game could look a little bit different, but it just meant that I think that was the game where you wastelanded me off of an Ancient Tomb.
Yeah.
And I think I had the One Ring running at that point. I just played the One Ring. And I think I was kind of hoping that you would wasteland rather than commit something to the board at that point. Because if you had, obviously I didn't know what was in your hand, but if you had any sort of body that you could put on the board, then I think that I would be more afraid of that. Because the One Ring was probably going to find me enough mana to produce something on the following turn.
Yeah, I think that I went into that trap because I think that what I was talking about there was just that, I'll try to limit the amount of mana resources that you have access to mitigate some of the ring's card draw, but you also play so many mana sources in that deck, right?
Yeah, it's about 50% mana, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's probably not a winning proposition when you get to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, many cards.
I think once the One Ring comes down, it just changes the texture of the entire game where you need to try and win before I can leverage all the cards.
Yeah.
Or have a Collect Roof and jam me up. Are sort of the two main options there, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Collect Roof is a little bit rough now with Pyrogoyfs, and I don't know if you played the Furies as well.
The build I was on today had 4 Fury, but only 2 Pyrogoyfs. But I was running the 2 Lotus Petal build. So it had slightly more fast mana, so you're more likely to be able to play like a busted 3-drop, like a Moon on turn 1.
Yeah.
Because I have found when I played the mono red builds before with the 4 Furies and the 4 Pyrogoyfs, sometimes I don't have the mana to play these 4-drops, so they just kind of sat there in my hand. Whereas just the couple of Lotus Petals to help you power out the opening thing means that you're keeping more opening hands, I think, and that makes a big difference. I'm not a mono red player by any stretch of imagination. I'd rather play Burn than mono red Stomper, to be honest with you. But I think that's an observation that I've had because I play a lot of Legacy and I sort of see these things from both sides of the table.
Yeah, and then one of the things that we always talk about, if you want to get better at playing Legacy as well, of course, learn your deck, but pick up some of the decks that you don't like playing as well, just to learn how they work as well. You know,
you say that. Every time I play Storm, I just have a horrible time. I cannot play that deck to save my life.
I brought that to my local game shop once, and then there I promised myself never to do it again. So I do understand exactly what you're saying there.
The way I like to see playing Storm on my channel is sometimes I have these really in-depth tactical leagues, and sometimes I have ones that are more like fun entertainment, and that's how I feel when I play Storm. It's more of an entertainment thing because I really struggle with that deck. But it's good to show other people, like, they may be able to see the lines I'm supposed to take, and it helps them sort of go, okay, this guy's a bit of a clown, but I can see how you could do this better. And I feel that's somewhat educational, even if I'm embarrassing myself.
Yeah, that's I agree. I totally agree, and I do like watching some Storm play sometimes as well. As you said, I would probably not pick it up for something that's more serious or where I'm looking for true enjoyment. But so the last deck that we tried is the Reanimator, and that deck is not dead.
It's not okay. It's really not okay. It is the best performing deck in Legacy right now in terms of top 8s, and it is just, it's too much. Like, it was the only deck that I said needed 2 bannings when we had the last ban cycle, and I feel relatively justified in that.
Yeah, it's scary that it's lost the 2 best cards the last 6 months, first Grief and now the Frog, and it's still going really, really strong. But it's such a hard deck to kind of combat against, because you have the broken Entomb Reanimator start of the deck, and then you have the fair grindy part. I mean, before the Reanimator players went back to playing blue, because I mean, if we go back to the way old days, Reanimator was a blue deck as well.
Yeah,
But
Careful
then
Study,
we had
Mystical Tutor, all that sort
yeah.
of jazz.
Yeah, exactly, and the really bad threats, the non-fire design threats. But now, when it was like the black-red one, you didn't face counterspell. There wasn't really a good fair plan. They tried it, but it wasn't really that good as well. But now, when you both have to play cards in your deck that beat a counterspell, like you need to play Fairy Macabres and Surgical Extractions and cards like that to have a chance. It makes these kind of fair toolbox decks a lot worse in that matchup, because you're playing cards that you take up a board slot, and a board slot is really, really important. And you're kind of reliant on having that as well. So the old keep Elvish Reclaimer turn 1 plan doesn't work anymore. So it's kind of rough in that way.
Yeah, so I played, I think it might have been the second game, I played a really sort of slow game, just taking it, step by step. And I had the ability to try and send it quite early if I wanted to, but I just was like, no, let's just check all the boxes, because I had the Fatal Push, so we can make sure that we don't have to worry about your creatures. And then when I'm ready, like a turn 2 Archon of Cruelty is really busted, but a turn 4 Archon of Cruelty is also really busted. So it doesn't matter if you sort of take your time. And I just had all the resources. The particular build I'm running today as well, I really like. This is one with the Tainted Indulgence, and it's also got a Murktide Regent in it. So the blue count is just much higher than the other builds that are running things like Bowmaster. So it just felt like I could actually reliably Force of Will stuff when it was in my hand, instead of having to be like, okay, I get to cantrip or Force of Will, I can't do both. And that was a really nice change. And Tainted Indulgence seems really good, because it's either... It's always draw 2 cards, right? It's either put a creature you don't want in the graveyard, so you've basically drawn 2 cards, or late game, it just is draw 2 cards. And big fan of that one.
That's really sweet. And one of the problems that I've noticed, because I've been playing Green White Depths at like the large tournaments that I played lately, and every time I face up against Reanimator or Blue Black Temper for that matter, I'm always it's the Fatal Push. It's such a good removal card against my deck. Before, when there were more bolts out there, or you could say plows as well, but more bolts and cards like that, was a little bit easier. But the Fatal Pushes are just so efficient, because they can get the Knight, they can get all of my threats. I don't play a threat that costs more than 3 mana.
Wow. Playing threats that cost more than 3 mana in Legacy right now is a pretty bold thing to do anyway, isn't it? So...
Yeah, you need to go red and Pyrogoyf, but that still dies the push.
Unless you're running Ancient Tombs.
Yeah, no, so I think that the push makes the matchup really hard for me as well.
The list I'm running only had 2 push-ins, so I was quite lucky to have one in the first game, I think.
Yeah.
But I've obviously got more in the sideboard, but I think having 2 removal spells in a deck with 8 cantrips, and then 2 Tainted Indulgence and stuff, it comes up a lot still. And you can wrestle your way out of problems.
Yeah, that, and that you always have the possibility to go early as well. We didn't see the reanimate the troll plan, but I think that's also something that's really a really good plan out of that deck as well, because it's like, do I want to spend my precious anti-graveyard removal for the troll when I also know that an Archon might be hitting the graveyard a little bit later? Probably not, and then you kind of die to the troll anyway. So
I think if you squint at Troll of Khazad-dûm just right, it does look a lot like Arkham's Astrolabe to me, because it's like 1 mana. It makes your mana really like fine. This deck runs fewer lands, but it also has a really stable mana base of basics. So it kind of gives you that stability, and it doesn't cost you a card. And it also, later on, just randomly wins you the game. So a bit like where you sort of cantrip off of Blinking and Arkham's Astrolabe or whatever. but it just kind of does it all. I think if you want to sort of curtail this deck from a banning perspective, I think you probably need to hit either the Troll or the Entomb. I think it's either of those. I think Entomb is probably more sensible in my mind, but I could understand hitting the Troll, but that's such a weird card to ban.
Yeah, it is, and especially because that effect is available in green as well and other colors, but it's just how well that card fits into this specific deck. I mean, it's not like it's a broken card in another black-based deck, but it's just this specific deck where it really kind of just solves a lot of your problems. But then I think that Entomb is if that card went, you could it's harder to get the reanimation package working in that case, and
you'd have to be a dedicated deck, like Show and Tell is a dedicated deck to what it does.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably a better space to be, given how powerful these creatures that we're reanimating are in the year of 2025.
Exactly. And I was thinking, because but just circling back to the troll discussion, just one point there as well, because I was sitting there when I was boarding and I was looking at my choke in the sideboard. I'm like, yeah, usually when I face a blue-based deck, I want to bring in choke, but this deck here is so efficient on working on a low mana count and has access to the troll as well. So I'm not even sure that that's a card that I want to bring in the game. I don't know.
Yeah,
what
like
you
3
do
mana
when
is
you
also like a big ask as well.
Yeah.
You're like under Daze and all the other pressure the deck can put on you.
Yeah, I play a choke. You play the Goif, and then it's off to the races.
Yeah, the basic swamp is. It sounds weird, but the basic swamp is such a deal breaker in this deck. It really does smooth it all together.
Yeah, but it's also, you need relevant things to do with the basic swamp, but you do have relevant things to do with the basic swamp as well, and then like sacrificing an island or two is okay. You have the Brazen Borrowers that you can use on a pivotal turn to untap and do even more stuff. So I think that it's I think that choke is a card that's not a definite board in the game in the matchup. But I need to play that one a couple of times before I have my final verdict on choke there.
So where are you at right now with your sort of green white depths deck? Where do you see it in the meta? What are the sort of problems and solutions you're looking to?
Yeah. So I see the two most problematic matchups from my experience isn't the 3 matchups that we played today, especially not Delver, but the 2 really hard matchups for me. It's the Eldrazi matchup and Nadu-based matchups. So the Eldrazi matchup is hard because of Sowing Mycospawn and Kozilek's Command. So Sowing Mycospawn messes with your mana in a way that you're not used to, that can go after your basic lands as well as your duels, so it's hard to kind of play off of basics and hope that solves itself. And then the Kozilek's Command can take care of Murktide with just 2 mana, which is really tough.
Tell me about that one. Yeah. I've been a victim of a few Kozilek's commands. I think with a turbo build, obviously, it's a little bit easier because you sort of go under it. You're not building up to this plan. You're slamming it down quickly and accelerating it out and protecting it with like Not of This World and things. So you can usually deal with a Kozilek's Command a bit easier because they either have to keep the mana open early and not deploy pressure, or you can see where it's coming and you can decide if it's the time to go. Whereas obviously Green White Depths is like a mid-range deck with this combo plan in. So you have to sort of try and play this mid-range game versus this deck with So Mycospawn and all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah, and they have Wastelands as well, so you can't really go. I mean, this deck has a hard time going aggressively for the merit plan. You need like your perfect draw for it. Otherwise, we're talking about turn 4, turn 5. You need to build your board a little bit and get it up and running. And it's also turns off the step as well, which is one of the protection spells that you have access to. You can Talon Gates it, but it's hard if Murktide is attacking. They Kozilek's Command it, and you go for Talon Gates, and you have to phase it out, and they get to untap, and they probably found another Kozilek's Command by that turn as well. So it's hard. You need to like go an early Safekeeper and then have good lands that you can sack to keep it alive, and then go for a late game. And then if you're able to maneuver that, you still have the Fleshraker that keeps chipping you down. So it's hard, and I don't really know what the answer for that is. I've been playing some dampening Tapping Spheres, it's called. That turns off soul lands, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I've been playing that, and I'm also probably, if I went to play a tournament and I thought I'd face Eldrazi, that's what you need to think, I would probably try 1 or 2 Cataclysms as well.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think that's probably the card that I've identified, because if you're able to build I mean, usually if you get to keep 1 creature, 1 land, you're fine against that deck.
Yeah, Eldrazi
Takes them a
creatures
while
these
to
days
build.
aren't actually that big for the most part, are they? There's sort of lots
No.
of like 3/3s and 4/4s. Sometimes they have the big exile guy at the top end of their curve.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, your knight is going to outclass all their creatures in a 1-for-1 battle.
Yeah, and you'll have a diamond down as well, so you'll be on 2 mana or something like that, so you can start building forward on the game plan. But that's one of the decks where I feel like we're struggling. The other deck, the Nadu deck, you can choose any of the 3 variants of the Nadu deck, because we have kind of the same problem there, where can't interact with Nadu on the stack unless we splash red, and that's when we go into the territory of getting a deck that's harder to kind of beat the other games with as well, the other matches. So it's really hard to combat that deck as well, especially because you don't have the fast merit plan either. You have the kind of mid game merit plane and the merit plane, and that's what makes that hard. And as soon as they get to draw 4, 5, 6, 7 cards, it's really hard for you.
Yeah, they've got a bunch of like plows in their 75. Like even the sort of chord build still has a bunch of plows in the sideboard as well. And if it's drawing all the cards in the world, there's not really much you can do to stop that either. And you can't really play anything like a Grafdigger's Cage in your deck because you're already running Green Sun Zenith yourself.
Yeah.
So
what I have done there is I brought in Gaddock Teague and said that your Green Sun Zenith is better than my Green Sun Zenith if I get to decide when we stop playing them. But now when we're playing some endings as well, it's even harder to justify Teague in that matchup because your removal is so important. The only good part about the Nadu matchup is that I haven't been seeing the deck that much. I thought that it would be one of the key contenders after the latest banning, but I haven't faced it that much.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think Cephalid Breakfast has only had 4 top 8 online finishes since the start of January, and that's out of 144 decks, I think it is. So that's a much smaller number I was expecting. And then the other Nadu decks have both got 1 or 2 appearances. But what I will say is the Buffalo Chicken Dip Legacy from a couple of weekends ago, there was 6 Nadu decks in the tournament, and 4 of them made top 8, and a Nadu deck won the tournament. And obviously Nadu just won the Legacy Showcase Challenge. So it's kind of a scary one. Like, I think the deck is better than people think it is, and people are going to sort of gravitate towards it a bit more. I've also noticed that recently Delver has been on the downtick, so it was putting up the most top 8s. And now the last couple of weeks it's slowed down, and now it's sort of getting massively outclassed by Blue Black Reanimator as people kind of gravitate towards what has been found to be really good. So I'm curious to see if that happens with Nadu over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that people are realizing that having a combo in your deck is probably something that we want to do, and then it's just finding the right shelf and the right combo that you like to play with, because that's kind of how it's been looking now, at least in the last couple of months, maybe years. It all flows together, but it feels like you want to have some kind of eject button or some way to close the game when it's not going your way.
Yeah, I'm also with Nadu as well at the moment. I think there's lots of different versions that you can play, and one of the issues with playing most of the versions and the best versions, I think, because I think the mid-rangey one with all the control spells is probably the weakest of the 3.
Yeah.
I think the amount of clicks that you have to do, like we had a couple of weeks of the lag on Magic Online being so severe that you couldn't really play that deck. There wasn't enough time to play it. So maybe that also contributed to it not being represented as much. But it is kind of miserable to like spend like 7 minutes clicking through your combo every time.
It is. I wonder now that the Cub is online as well. I think it's online now, or it's coming online really soon. The 2 mana cat creature that doubles your counters a little bit faster than Bristly Build does. I
Oh,
think
is that out now? Is it
that'll.
online? That's good.
Yeah, I think I saw it on some lists, or I was just reading that it's going to be online really, really soon. But I think it's online now, so that's going to kind of shorten down the some of the matches at least when you have that card out. It gets really. I actually played a lot of the mid-rangey version of Nadu locally. I took a little bit of a depth pause, and that cat could close games that you were losing. But it kind of, the problem with that deck, as I saw it, was that you played too many mana dorks, so you weren't really a good control deck, you weren't really a good mid-range deck, and you weren't really a good combo deck, so it didn't really find its footing. I think at the breakfast build or the elves build is a lot stronger.
Yeah, I agree with both of those statements. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the mid-range build is fine. I think it's people that want to play control, and they're like, well, I guess the best control deck is actually a combo deck with some control-y elements. So maybe that's what the plan is.
Yeah. But if we talk about it, just to kind of close up the argument of where I see the Green White Depths deck position, that was kind of the bad matchups, and then also Mono Red and Reanimator being hard matchups. You need to learn and have a plan for them. I don't think that I have the best plan right now, but I think that you can beat them. But I think that one of the benefits right now is that you're not facing like being control decks or other control decks, and control decks have historically been a really poor matchup for the Green White Depths deck. So if you can find a way to attack the most popular decks, the 3 decks that we played today, and still have a plan for the other matchups, I think that this could be a viable option. You need to play well. I didn't play well today, but you need to play well in your games as well. But if you do that, I think that this could be a potential sleeper deck because it does have, as a toolbox deck, you can start attacking these decks in various ways. You just need to find the right one. And if we were to see a ban on one key card from one of these decks, but still not making control a viable deck anymore, I see ourselves very good positioned in that case.
Yeah. On the topic of control, I think there's been 4 control decks that have had top 8s since the start of January online.
Yeah.
That's the sort of level we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and usually control decks are quite popular. It takes time to win, but if you're a competent blue wizard, you always want to sleeve up a control deck, I guess. Yeah. So how do you, if you were to go to a tournament, which of these top decks would you bring? Which is the kind of the most broken one?
I think Blue Black Reanimator is probably the most busted one, but I don't have this in paper, and I like playing Delver. So if I was going to play any of these decks, I would probably play Delver. Yeah. But I don't know if I like the current Delver builds as much as other people do. I was an old school rogue player, so I used to play with Nimble Mongoose and Stifles, and I'm going to play that again on the channel soon. Something along those lines. Maybe not Nimble Mongoose, but I think Stifles are actually in a pretty reasonable spot right now.
Yeah. No, they solve some of the problems. I was looking at some Dreadnought decks and playing around with those as well, because you get to play the Stifles for free and the Consigns as well. But the Dreadnought isn't the best positioned creature right now either. Dice to push, etc., etc.
Yeah, but you only need to protect it for a very short window of time at least.
That's true. But if you were to what do you see any sleeper decks or any of the like non-meta decks, if you want to call them, that you feel is well positioned right now?
Well, this probably won't come as any surprise to you, but I think Turbo Depth is actually in a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah.
So, obviously I play it quite a lot, and my win percentage with it is over 70% into the field. Obviously, I play the deck a lot, so I'm going to have a little bit of an edge compared to someone just picking it up. But the matchups into a lot of the top decks are really good. Like the Nadu decks aren't great, but like we were saying, there's not that many Nadu decks surfacing at the top. So being able to be good into like the Reanimator decks and good into like Mono Red is basically a buy for the deck. It's really good. and Delver is another reason to play Turbo Depths. So I think it matches up well into the format because there's not loads of sort of grindy white decks around, like green-white depths.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, I always liked to face Turbo Depths when I was on Green White Depths. That was we had a local player who usually sleeved that up, and that felt good from the Green White place. Yeah, it was.
It's not a good time for poor little Turbo Depths stuff, but yeah, I think I actually wrote an article on my Patreon today. Not that I'm plugging, but but it was about how the breakdown of the format at the moment and what decks are doing well. And how I think that you have a lot of people that aren't indexing as hard as they should be into main deck Graveyard Hate. So before we had the bannings, people were running, you'd have Delver decks with 2 Grafdigger's Cage in the main deck. And you'd have all these decks running like 2 Gnarl Spellbomb and stuff like that. And people just aren't doing that as much anymore. But if you look, the actual percentage of decks that are making top 8s on online events, the graveyard-centric decks has actually probably gone up a little bit because you don't have things like Carnforge anymore. So I think you'd be looking at running some more Graveyard Hate. And, there are a lot of good Graveyard Hate cards that people should just be running as creatures. Like, once upon a time, we used to have, like, 4 Endurances, like, packed into Bant control decks even. I think we should be going back to seeing a lot more stuff like that because Endurance is really good into a lot of decks right now.
Yeah, I played some Frog Reanimator when that was legal against the Cradle Control deck, and couldn't win that match. They had 4 main deck Endurances. It was impossible.
I also like the new tech from the Cord Nadu decks of Gilded Drake. So if they do manage to get a big monster, you can just cord up your Gilded Drake and take it. So you don't have to keep your mana open all the time. You can play your own game, and then when you need to, you can just pivot and grab their guy.
I was, why can't Green Sun see it be a little bit more like Cord sometimes? You need to put a painter in play or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, but but that's great. And I mean, once again, thank you very, very much for both playing some games against me, but also kind of sitting down and talking. That's always nice to do, and always nice to be able to talk to someone new about some games and matchups and stuff like that. So I really, really appreciate this. Thank you a lot.
Well, I had a great time, and I really appreciate you spending the time to chat to me as well. And for people watching on my channel, the link to the Chrono Moon channel will be there, and you can check out the other side of these matches when it comes out.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing here as well. I'll fix that. Everything that you said.
No worries. Thank you very much for today.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day and keep safe.
Remember, everyone, like and subscribe, everyone. There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to support me in the channel, please check out my Patreon. It has a free guide to budget Turbo Depths, as well as 3 tiers of support. A low-cost one that enters you into my monthly raffle for a free donation deck on the channel, a mid-tier subscription that gives you access to my detailed Turbo Depths guide that is updated every month, as well as regular articles, and lastly, the higher tier gives you all of the above, as well as a monthly donation deck for my channel. If you're interested in supporting the channel this way, please check out the link in the description.